Good afternoon. Thanks for your attendance. Appreciate your interest. So Gold Hydrogen was formed back in 2020. We're totally focused on the discovery and development of natural hydrogen. And most of you, if not all, have a familiarity with hydrogen anyway as an energy source, as an energy mix into, I guess, climate change, benefiting the globe by introducing a green energy solution. So natural hydrogen is a little bit different to manufactured hydrogen. I'll talk about that in a minute, but that's what we're all about. Disclaimer, you've probably come across a few of those today. That's the contents of the presentation. And just in summary, we've basically a low-cost natural hydrogen focus. I mentioned back in 2020, our founders, they identified in the archives in the South Australian government records that wells drilled in the 1920s and 30s looking for oil on the Yorke Peninsula in South Australia didn't find any oil or gas, but they found a gas that burnt, and they determined that it was hydrogen. Hydrogen back in the 20s and 30s wasn't really worth a great deal, didn't know what to do with it. They plugged and abandoned the wells. The information from the drilling activity went into the archives, and there it sat. So in 2020, Gold Hydrogen was formed with the knowledge that hydrogen had been identified on the Yorke Peninsula. So you can see the map there on the right. The green area is a granted tenement. We've been doing exploration on that tenement now for most of this calendar year. Having listed, our IPO was in January. And the orange and the grey shaded tenure are application tenements. So we've got a large acreage position in South Australia, and we're totally focused on hydrogen. Well, not quite. Our Ramsay project is in the middle of the Yorke Peninsula, and it from the top of the green section down towards the bottom of the Yorke Peninsula. We've recently drilled our first exploration well. That was last month, Ramsay 1, and it was adjacent to, not far from, the original Ramsay oil bore one that intersected hydrogen. And what we did find when we drilled into basement on that well last month was a little bit of helium. Helium is quite a valuable commodity. We're very interested that we've identified helium, so we'll certainly be looking for it again in our exploration as we go forward. We recognise that hydrogen is a fairly new industry, so we partnered up with some experts early on to help us work out the best path forward, not just for exploration, but what we might do in terms of development of the project. Schlumberger, now known as SLB, International Oil and Gas Explorer, but they are also focused on new and emerging energy solutions, including hydrogen. Other expertise we've gathered in as well as we've been moving forward. One thing that we're confident about with natural hydrogen is if we find enough of it for it to flow to surface and become a commercial item, it'll be very economic. And that will be an advantage over the manufactured hydrogen that requires processing equipment such as electrolysis on surface and huge energy input to do that production manufactured hydrogen. As an industry, there's a huge investment globally into hydrogen at the moment, and it's growing and forecast to increase its growth rate in terms of investment. The industries looking at it are broad. It's not just anything in particular. Things like steel manufacturer are looking at using hydrogen as their energy source. Fertiliser is another one that can use a lot of hydrogen. Ammonia is nitrogen and hydrogen. Transport is an increasing interest in transport using hydrogen as a fuel, and fuel cells in vehicles are becoming of interest. Toyota and Hyundai have hydrogen fuel cell vehicles in Australia, and they've done a lot of tests globally on those. Other vehicle manufacturers in Europe and other places are also looking at hydrogen vehicles. What's driving the interest? I think predominantly I mentioned before, the world is going greener in terms of its energy solutions. Hydrogen, and particularly natural hydrogen, is going to be a good, clean energy solution. Technologies, with the investment in hydrogen industry globally, the technologies are at a rapid rate working out how to handle, transport and convert hydrogen from the gas into an energy form. So there's a massive amount of investment going in that. One of the energy forms is to convert through fuel cell technology hydrogen gas to produce electricity, and in burning, well, not exactly burning, but in the combustion or whatever process you want to call it, hydrogen emits water, so there's no emission issues with respect to greenhouse gases or anything like that. Hydrogen is a very clean fuel. Transport, even aeroplanes, there's work in some aeroplane companies to use hydrogen as a source of fuel for their aircraft. If you're familiar with hydrogen, you may have come across the various colour classifications. Green hydrogen is probably the most common referred to in the media these days, and that's manufactured hydrogen using an electrolysis process with energy coming from renewable resources such as solar and wind, but biomass is also an energy mix within green. Blue is perhaps not so clean as green, using natural gas, perhaps with a combination of coal as an energy source to the electrolysis process to develop hydrogen. And then brown, black, that's using coal, and grey is natural gas. The difference between the grey and the blue is that the blue tends to, when it manufactures hydrogen, sequester the CO2 back into the ground, so it's not emitting so many greenhouse gases. What we're confident of is that with natural hydrogen, we know that we've got low environmental impact. We've got no energy requirements for thermal processing. The thermal processing is done by nature under the ground. Production cost, we're estimating at around $1 a kilogram, which is much less than the manufactured hydrogens. And the cost comparison for existing power generation, we think, is going to be quite low as well. A little bit of a surprise to get helium at the bottom of the first well that we drilled, Ramsay 1. We were testing for it just in case. The size of the molecules, hydrogen and helium, H2 and He is on its own. They're not that much different. And globally, what we understand is that projects that have 1% or greater are commercially viable in terms of purity of helium. We're sitting on the gas sample that we got from Ramsay 1 well, we had a 3.6% purity. So if we can replicate that and find a volume that we can get to surface that is commercial, we've got a reasonably sound project in terms of helium, as well as our focus being on hydrogen. So the company, I mentioned in the 1920s and 30s, and the table on my, well, I think it's your left actually, the columns on your left, Ramsay 1 oil bore. At a depth of 240 metres, they intersected hydrogen at a purity of about 76%. When we drilled Ramsay 1, we were about the same depth and we intersected 73%. So we know there's hydrogen there. So the first box in terms of us working on what we're trying to work on has been ticked. What we don't know is how much is there and how easy it's going to be to get to surface. So that's our objective going forward. Ramsay 2 well spuds tomorrow, and that's going to help us with data on the path forward. Before we listed in January, we had an independent set of technical experts do a prospective resource assessment and report for us, and they determined an unrisked prospective hydrogen resource of 1.3 billion kilograms in that Ramsay project area, which is a massive amount of hydrogen. I mentioned before that we've ticked a box in terms of knowing that the hydrogen is there, and geologically this is a very simplified image, and I'm not a geologist, but the generation of hydrogen deep in the Earth's crust, probably in this instance from iron interacting with water, the iron oxidises, the hydrogen gets liberated and it gradually finds its way up to the surface. You need a seal and trap to contain it, and we know that there's low porosity limestone in the area that we're working on. You need a structure that permits the migration. We know that it's a highly fractured zone that we're working in, so the fractures enable gas to work through it. And reservoir, well, we think there's a couple of reservoirs. We think the basement, even though it gets generated well into the basement, we think the basement is a key reservoir, but also the limestones below the tight limestones that form the seal and cap can also provide porosity, which can be a reservoir. So they're the things that we're investigating going forward. Since inception, we've been flat out busy. We listed in January. We've done a bunch of non-invasive activities, soil gas sampling, airborne surveys. The airborne survey has been very helpful because it helps us understand the structure that we're dealing with through their gravimetric radar systems. And we've started drilling, and without drilling you don't know for sure what you're getting. So our maiden drilling campaign started last month. Again, second well starts tomorrow. The opportunity in terms of commercialisation of the project seems to be growing. We have interest to talk to us about what we might do with any production from companies in Japan and Korea, not to mention Australia. And the ability to transport hydrogen by compressing it and putting it in road tankers or gas cylinders. Industrial hydrogen cylinders have been around for many, many years on the back of trucks. And pipelines, the South Australian government has modified the legislation on the natural gas pipelines around the country to take up to 10% hydrogen. And this is mirroring what's happening in Europe at the moment. So the ability to get hydrogen into households basically for heating and whatever is there, and the existing pipeline system will cope with that at a percentage. So we're confident that whatever we find and produce will be easy to get to market. Our core team has experience in the junior space. Personally, I've been involved as a COO and a CEO of a junior oil and gas explorer, so gas is something I'm familiar with. What we're doing with gold hydrogen is akin to natural gas, except it's a different molecule. The other guys on the team, including our COO, have got plenty of experience in junior exploration activities. And the board, you might recognise one of those faces, Alexander Downer. South Australia is his patch from years ago. He's a very helpful and independent chairman for the board. So we're very... it's a good mix and complementary in terms of skills. Just in summary, we've got significant tidal, prospective resource of 1.3 billion kilograms. The Ramsay project is 100% owned, and we're doing our exploration right now on our Ramsay 2 well. Start drilling tomorrow. Our strategic engagements with technical experts is in place and it's growing. We recently announced 2 MOUs with companies to help us work out what we might do for a pilot project in the near future. And we are confident that hydrogen will be a mix of the energy solution going forward. It's exciting for us. We're keen to get it going, and we are getting it going. Thank you.